Okay, here we go. This is video number 4 and the final video for the first unit of AP Human Geography. Today we're going to be talking about the cultural hierarchy, and indeed this entire slideshow, this portion of it, is really all about culture. Culture, of course, is the way of life of a group of people, and in human geography we'll be talking awfully lot about people's culture, their faith, their language, all about their identity, the food they eat, the clothes they wear, and the daily habits that they practice. So when we think about the cultural hierarchy, a hierarchy is like a ladder. So we're going to work from the individual all the way up to the group. And we're going to start with cultural traits, single specific attributes. So every single one of you have a unique set of traits. Some of you are athletes, some of you are artists, some of you are academians. All of us have certain traits. You may share some traits with siblings and family members, or you may not, because these traits are individual to you. However, you are part of a cultural complex. The members of your immediate family or even your extended family usually have some discrete combinations of traits. Everybody practices their faith in a similar way. People like the same kinds of food. So the complex is kind of like a small group of people that are closely related, whereas the traits, again, are individualized. As you work your way a little bit bigger, a culture system might be something like a group of people, a larger group of people who have similarities such as ethnicity, religion, or language. This might be something a little bit bigger, like Boca Raton, South Florida, Palm Beach County, that kind of a group of people where, again, complexes will be different, traits will be unique, but generally the cultural system will be similar. You work another level up and you go to the cultural region. This might be like all Americans, maybe even Canadians lumped into this as well, because they share a similar cultural region. Again, lots of variations, individual and small groups, but as a whole, that cultural region will prevail over that larger area. And then finally, the biggest umbrella term, the cultural realm. Here we're talking about, say the word, Asians. And a lot of Americans don't realize there's a lot of different nationality and ethnic groupings within Asia. But cultural realm-wise, you could say Asia is a realm. Different regions like East Asia, Southwest Asia, Southeast Asia. And then again, within each country, you may find cultural systems. You may find within a city a group of people that share a particular cultural complex. And again, each individual has those cultural traits. This map basically just highlights what I was talking about. If we were using big, broad strokes of a brush, we could say Latin America. We could say the Buddhist world. It's interesting, Japan is kind of in a cultural group all by itself. Sinic, that's always going to be related to Chinese. The Islamic world. But again, within the Islamic world, we can find a lot of variations. Are they Sunni? Are they Shia? How do they practice their Islamic faith? So all of these are big, broad strokes of a brush. This is a little bit more detail. If we go into sub-Saharan Africa, and again, we're changing scale. Think about one of the skills, changing scale. We're zooming in. We show less of the world. Everything on the map gets bigger. But then you start to see that the different tribal groups within Africa have different ways that they were providing food for their cultures and their societies. So what we're seeing here is that when you zoom in, you see a lot more diversity. So these cultural hearths are the places where traits develop. The hearth, I always say it's like the heart. It's kind of the source of the blood that's pumping through your body. So the cultural hearth is the source of the culture that's going to diffuse outward across space and time from the origin point. Oftentimes, in ancient history, humans had their cultural hearths in areas of agriculture. So really, you look at the river valley civilizations, and this map does a good job of showing that. You see that there's Mesopotamia, for example, Western Africa, for example, Andean America, for example. If you go to Machu Picchu in Peru, and we took the kids there on a spring break trip one year, it was fantastic. But you can really see how Cusco is the hearth of that Andean culture that spreads all up and down the Pacific coast of South America. So cultural diffusion is basically just the spread of the idea or the innovation from its source or hearth to all of the other places that it moves to. Cultural diffusion is going to be one of those 5 themes of geography because we're going to be talking about movement. And you can map the movement of innovations, ideas, technology, religions, languages, agricultural techniques, on and on and on and on and on. Sometimes, though, you get 2 different parts of the world that have similar cultures, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they had contact or that there was a diffusion from point A to point B. It could be what we call independent invention. I'll give you an example. There are pyramids in Egypt. There are pyramids that the Mayas built in Mexico. That doesn't mean that the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Mayans were hanging out together describing the best way to build a pyramid. It's independent invention. Sometimes there are cultural barriers that prevent the diffusion of an innovation or an idea. These could be prohibitions or prescribed behaviors by the culture or the society. Sometimes parents and grandparents and elders in a situation don't like to see that young people are changing or innovating or becoming different. So these cultural barriers can sometimes slow, delay, or even inevitably stop the spread of a cultural idea or innovation. So what types of diffusion do we have? There's 2 big broad categories, expansion and relocation. We'll hit expansion on this slide. There are 3 kinds of expansion diffusion, but the most important thing to remember is that with expansion diffusion, there will be an increase in the number of people who get the idea or the innovation. There will be more people practicing the traits after the diffusion has occurred. So the first kind is what we call contagious, and it means kind of just like what it sounds. It's like a disease. It goes in every direction. It affects everybody. Everybody starts to practice the new idea or the innovation. It could also be hierarchical. Remember I said hierarchy is like a ladder. So this is the one that goes from top to bottom. If the superintendent of Palm Beach County comes up with a new student protocol and tells all the principals that they have to institute it on their campuses, and then the principals tell the department chairs, people like me, you need to go to the teachers in your department and let them know. And then the teachers start telling the students. That's hierarchical, from the superintendent to the principal to the department chairs to the teachers, on and on and on and on and on. Or it could be stimulus, where the trait is not exactly adopted, but instead it is adapted. And you see Mac and PC on here, but I'll give you another great example. iPhone versus Android. Very similar technology, but of course, slightly different. So if there's an adaptation before the adoption, that's going to be stimulus diffusion. The stimulus causes an effect. On the top, you see what we call contagious expansion diffusion. Remember, expansion is the umbrella term. Contagious is a type of expansion. The one in the B picture at the bottom, that's hierarchical. Notice that it doesn't hit everybody, but it is expanding. There are more dots colored after the diffusion than there were at the beginning with just the single colored dot in the middle. But notice that it skips over others. So hierarchical is always going to be about accessibility and connectivity. If you don't have access, or if you're not connected, you're not going to get the innovation or the idea. So I always tell people this is like being in my remind or not being in my remind. It's like following Spatial Shark or not following Spatial Shark. If you're not following, you're not getting the ideas and the innovations. So it's hierarchical diffusion from top to bottom. Expansion, everybody would get it face to face, like a disease, every single time. Stimulus is kind of hard to draw an image for, and sometimes in your Air squares, I know that it's hard to create an image, but that's where you can start to use maybe your describe words and you can tell a little bit about it. Here's another way you can think of a description of hierarchical. Think about a company, the president and the CEO, maybe based in a big office in New York City, and some of the key executives might be there too. But they might also have another office, say, on the other coast of the United States in Los Angeles, other big VPs and big offices in those places as well. But then you go down to the next level. Remember, hierarchy's like a ladder. So maybe they've got managers for different regions of the country. Notice we're changing scale from national to regional. And then they might even have local offices at rank 3, salespeople in big cities all over the country, but only those that are in the more important positions would be at the regional office, and the really critical people up at the national headquarters in, say, Los Angeles or New York City. So basically, this is just mapping what we saw on the previous chart. You have the key people in the national office, the key people in the regional offices, the key people in the local offices, and this would kind of show how ideas would go through that corporate hierarchy from top to bottom. So relocation diffusion, big, huge difference. Remember I said that expansion, there's going to be an increase. With relocation, there's no increase. There's merely a relocation of the idea. It doesn't spread. So this is kind of like Hinduism in a way. You can't become Hindu. You're born. Remember, Hindus have a strong belief in reincarnation. So there's not an increase in the number of people practicing. When they move from one location to another, they simply relocate their ideas and they build their temple and they continue to practice with their families, the same as they did when they were on the Indian subcontinent. But now they've been moved to a new location, whether it's in the UK or Canada or the US or in the Caribbean. Trinidad has a really large Hindu population. So relocation diffusion, there's no expansion of the idea, there's just a relocation of the idea. So the idea will be carried along with the people who are moving. So sometimes you'll see relocation is AKA migrant diffusion. When two cultures come together, one of two things generally happens. First, one culture could dominate and take over the other. That's what we call acculturation. This is kind of like when the United States kind of removed the Native Americans from their native lands, forced them to live on a reservation. They changed their clothes, changed their hair, changed their educational system. That is where they kind of lose their identity, and that's what we call acculturation. If the submissive group gets to pick and choose, then we could say that it's transculturation. Assimilation is when they've completely lost their identity and you almost can't differentiate between what they were before and what they are now. It's completely different. It's totally changed if they've become assimilated. So if they meet on equal terms, transculturation. If one culture dominates the other, acculturation. But remember, there's always time, distance, decay. Everything's related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. And remember what Disney says. It really is a small world after all. In today's world, we can be in Europe for breakfast tomorrow. Columbus took 3 months to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Technology and transportation communication are making the world smaller and smaller all the time. So finally, cultural perception, we think about a sense of place. When you go to a new area, like on a tourist trip, when you go away to your college visit and you walk the campus for the first time, you get a feeling. You start to see the sights, you smell the smells, you taste the foods. When you go to a different part of the world, you're starting to develop an impression of the area. But remember, you have to be careful. No one place in the world can be defined by a single story. Just like appearance is a poor predictor of who people really are, it's very dangerous to always define a group of people or a certain place in the world as all being alike. Remember, the cultural traits are always unique and different per the individual. Yes, there may be generalizations, there may be things that are similar, but we have to be careful about, say, for example, Africa. When you go on It's a Small World ride, it's really kind of odd to have such a differentiation of Europeans in that ride, but then when we get to Africa, there's one single image. That's not exactly an accurate portrayal of what African culture is really like. So how would you describe the South? How would you look at the South as it, is it NASCAR? But NASCAR today, you have races on the West Coast, in the Midwest, up in the Northeast. It's not just a good old boy racing network anymore. Is Boca in the South? The joke is the further south in Florida you go, the more north you get because you've got so many people transplanted from Philadelphia or Boston or New York. When you define the South, remember this is a perceptual region. So these are 6 different ways that the South can be defined. So this is what we mean when we say that perceptual regions often have fuzzy borders. Cultural environments, this is when we have, of course, human-environment interaction. Cultural ecology. Remember there's 2 big schools of thought here. Determinism says that your culture will be determined by your environmental physical surroundings. Possibilism says that we can use our technology, our innovations, and our ideas to overcome the limitations of the environment. Kind of like air conditioning in South Florida. What would we do without it? So look at this, a great example of possibilism. A family in sub-Saharan Africa, look at their traditional style housing, look at their traditional tools, but at the same time, they have a solar oven that's cooking dinner. Very interesting. Or here, this is in the Middle East, in Dubai, a great place to go skiing if you want to get away from the 120-degree heat outside. Possibilism at its best. Finally, the ESPN. Don't forget, economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental. Have a great day.